In this video, we review Tesla's income statement for the second quarter of 2020 and compare it to the first quarter of 2020. Please note that all of this money is in US dollars. So the first section is revenues, and the first line of that is automotive sales. In the second quarter was $4,911 million compared to the first quarter of $4,893 million. Automotive leasing in the second quarter was $268 million compared to the first quarter of $239 million. Total automotive revenue in the second quarter was $5,179 million compared to the first quarter of $5,132 million. Energy generation and storage in the second quarter was $370 million compared to the first quarter of $293 million. Services and other revenue in the second quarter was $487 million compared to the first quarter of $560 million. And total revenues for the second quarter was $6,036 million compared to the first quarter of $5,985 million. Now the cost of revenues is in the next section. So the cost of revenues for automotive sales is $3,714 million in the second quarter compared to the first quarter of $3,699 million. Automotive leasing in the second quarter was $148 million compared to $122 million. Total automotive cost of revenues in the second quarter is $3,862 million compared to the first quarter of $3,821 million. Energy generation and storage in the second quarter was $349 million compared to the first quarter of $282 million. Services and other cost revenues in the second quarter was $558 million compared to the first quarter of $648 million. The total cost of revenues in the second quarter was $4,769 million compared to the first quarter of $4,751 million. Now the gross profit for the second quarter was $1,267 million compared to the first quarter of $1,234 million. The next section is operating expenses. The first line is research and development expense. In the second quarter was $279 million compared to the first quarter of $324 million. Selling, general, and administrative expenses in the second quarter was $661 million compared to the first quarter of $627 million. Restructuring and other expenses, it's blank for 4 quarters, there's nothing there. The total operating expenses in the second quarter was $940 million compared to the first quarter of $951 million. So here we have income from operations for the second quarter is $327 million compared to the first quarter of $283 million. We have an interest income of $8 million in the second quarter compared to the first quarter of $10 million. We have interest expense in the second quarter of $170 million compared to the first quarter of $169 million. We have other expense in the second quarter was $15 million compared to the first quarter of $54 million. And we have income before income taxes in the second quarter of $150 million compared to the first quarter of $70 million. And provision for income taxes in the second quarter was $21 million compared to the first quarter of $2 million. And net income for the second quarter was $129 million compared to the first quarter of $68 million. Net income attributable to non-controlling interests and redeemable non-controlling interests in the second quarter was $25 million compared to the first quarter of $52 million. Net income attributable to common stockholders in the second quarter was $104 million compared to the first quarter of $16 million. So the next section is net income or loss per share of common stock attributable to common stockholders. basic in the second quarter was 56 cents compared to the first quarter of 9 cents. Diluted in the second quarter was 50 cents compared to the first quarter of 8 cents. The next section, and it's the last section of the income statement, the weighted average shares used in computing net income or loss per share of common stock. So the weighted average shares used in the second quarter 2020 for basic was 186 million compared to the first quarter of 183 million. Diluted in the second quarter was 207 million compared to the first quarter of 199 million. So not too bad, not too bad. Definitely room for improvement, but not too bad for having the main factory close for a good portion of the quarter. So at Tesla Discourse, your opinion matters. What do you think?